Hi everyone, sit down and grab yourself a drink because today we are talking about desirability, which has fascinated me for a long time. And if you are a Black woman, please watch this video to the end so you can get the full picture. Now, racism is real, internal and external. There are racist men, racist beauty standards, and I have a whole video on why different groups may resent Black women, but I don't think that's the full picture as to why our desirability is always called into question. And typically, the reason people have as to why our desirability is called into question, or we are rarely called desirable women by the masses, usually revolves around us being darker skinned, our hair, our features, and nowadays our personalities, femininity, or lack thereof, which is somehow based on race. I do believe the latter two are cover ups for what is really going on because it's something no one can measure. If I say randomly I don't date Latino men because they have bad personalities, no one can question me because we can't measure personality. And stereotypes can be real or imagined, but there's a reason less men want to explore whether they are real or not when it comes to Black women. All women are capable of having negative traits or being unattractive, but this is oftentimes overlooked when it comes to other races of women. No one seems to point out the flaws of other races as a whole, and when they are unattractive, they are rarely attached with that label as a whole. They just become invisible. And I spent most of my teenage years behind a beauty page that focused on Black women. And I'm not saying every single Black woman looked like the women I would upload on this page, but what became apparent to me was the diversity in Black beauty. I think Black women as a whole are the most diverse looking women. From Gambia to Jamaica, they can look absolutely nothing alike. And so the statement of not finding Black women attractive was always quite strange to me. I think Black women should understand that desirability, which is based on the number of men seeking you, not individually, but in a societal context where whole groups of women are known as desirable or undesirable, has little to do with beauty or even personality. I believe it has more to do with how certain types of women make men feel, their own men, but also men of other communities. And when I speak of men, I'm talking about what I refer to as everyday men. And this is the average man you see day to day with insecurities that impact his choices in life. And this man is most of the population. So when the average guy likes you, you will be known as a desirable woman. I'm going to explore a few different factors that I feel influence Black women's desirability being called into question in the current day, or the real factors that influence why Black women are not as sought after by as many men as other races of women. And so there's two sides to this. What makes people say so freely that Black women are undesirable, and what causes different types of men to say, no, I wouldn't date a Black woman. And so the first one is Black men and their choices and options. And so being known as a desirable woman is based on men in your community and other races of men. And we, of course, have to start at home. And I believe that because the Black community in the West is very vocal about racism, onlookers may be confused that some Black men who have access to all women, athletes, musicians, etc., would choose to be with a non-Black woman over a Black woman. And society, including Black women, have internalized this as a sign that Black women must be lacking something. Along with the fact that many Western Black men are lifelong bachelors, and for example, in America, 48% of Black men do not marry any woman of any race, and there are more Black women than Black men. Other communities have the opposite gender imbalance, which obviously influences Black women's marriage rates in the West, and so the optics are not great. This pushes a narrative that Black women are undesired by men in our community. And I think we need to look at some situational factors. When we conclude that a Black man choosing to be with another race of woman means that Black women are lacking something, this would suggest that a group like Filipino men, since Filipinos are very eager to date anyone who isn't Filipino, are the worst men on the planet, worse than Pakistanis, Mexican men, or men. they must be the worst partners. And I think we can see from looking at different stats, different documentaries, that probably Filipino men are not the worst men on the planet, and that there's probably something going on with Southeast Asian women and how they view themselves that pushes them to seek foreign men. And so I've never seen black men's choices as something to do with me, but of course, black men want you to believe otherwise because they benefit from black women having low self-esteem. And you can read all about that on my website, linked in my ebook. Another thing that the masses and black women especially don't take into account is that non-black women prefer black men to every other man of color. And I remember a tweet by a confused black woman where a black French footballer and his young pretty white wife was being used to mock an Egyptian footballer and his homely looking Egyptian wife. And she retweets these images with the caption, "At least he likes his women." And although this Egyptian man is seen outside hotels in London with white women, this tweet went viral and was accepted by the masses as a logical statement. These men like their women and black men do not. And many of you may not be aware based on the company you keep, but many non-black men of color pay for sex with white and or other women while married to women of their background. And society is telling me that millions of single Asian men, because there is a gender imbalance, would rather be single than date outside their race because they just love Asian women so much. This is obviously not true, and anyone who has been up close with these communities knows that they also greatly desire other races of women. They just don't have the opportunity like black men do to execute these desires.
Would you have any relationship with any black guys at all?
Oh, of course, man. Every day. It's all about this to this.
And this kind of "your men don't want you, they're the only ones who don't like their women" narrative that exists because a black man may be with Becky, but the Chinese man is with Ming, doesn't make sense to me. I don't see why people and society continue to compare two different outputs when the input isn't the same, and I need black women to understand that this doesn't make sense. The next factor that contributes to us being known as undesirable is what black men prioritize when dating. Bear in mind, this is against a backdrop where black men have access to more women than other men of color. So they would behave the same way, but they don't have the ability. So as a comparative, I've used Elon Musk and Zuckerberg, some of the richest white men with past or current partners, and QC, the CEO of Quality Control, and some of the beauties he's been involved with. Now, when it comes to black men, especially those born in the West, and also men from other oppressed communities like Hispanics, Asians, again, bear in mind these men don't have the same currency in the dating marketplace as black men. They can oftentimes be very looks conscious. And when we say looks, we mean looks that align with the white beauty standard. And the looks of oppressed people are sometimes all they have. And back in the day, having a certain look meant your life was easier than another person in your tribe. And so this obsession still carries on today. And when you don't have generational wealth to pass down and find yourself as part of an underclass with a very harsh history, a woman's hair texture, her features, her skin tone become the number one criteria when choosing a mate. And unfortunately, there are many black women who now have insecurities about their beauty without understanding that it's not that your features are ugly, but they are just not the features of those at the top of society. And this is very telling if you look at societies like Brazil, where the chance of seeing a successful black Brazilian man with a black Brazilian woman is non-existent. But in the UK, it's still possible with a Dean Forbes, for example, even though there are way more Afro-Brazilian women with admixture, lighter skin, smaller features. This is solely because of the level of racism, poverty, and how low black Brazilians are made to feel. So the men are desperate for status, while in the UK, there's a bit more progress, and you will see darker skinned women, kinkier hair, still married to successful men. So again, as we move through the article, I want you to understand that many of the things affecting your desirability actually have nothing to do with you directly. It's why, not always, but you oftentimes see white men who have access to all women with a white woman or someone else who is very average looking. Not to generalize, but it appears to me that most Western black men see sex, accessing that as soon as possible, and looks that are in proximity to whiteness as their top criteria in a spouse. And because black men shame black female sexuality so much, as they see it as the cause of dysfunction in our community, black women are confused about this and think being the opposite will enable them to gain favor with Western black men, which is not true, and why the your degrees don't mean anything narrative is so popular in black manosphere spaces. This is why the richest black American man saw it fit to marry an Eastern European playboy model. If you fulfill those two criteria, you have a chance with a Western black man of any status. And this is why many women of other races who lack morals or education have those two things and refer to black men as the easiest tricks, because that is all they have to bring to the table. Whereas with other races of men, they appear to value other attributes. And again, it's not every single non-black man, but it's definitely a lot more than the Western black man. Many black women naively think, I'm not just a fat ass, I've got a degree, I'm an entrepreneur, I'm a hustler. But most black men, at least those doing something productive, don't really care about that unless they are opportunists. And unfortunately, there are many black men who are opportunists. But you're competing on a base level with every other race of woman on sex. Bear in mind that black women are held to a different standard. They love non-black hoes, but black women are held to a completely different standard on sex and proximity to whiteness in a white supremacist culture where black men have been subjugated and rarely have a seat at the table. And if you don't win this competition, many of you begin to think it's how you come across or your beauty must be lackluster, when it's probably just that you aren't in proximity to whiteness. And this doesn't mean being white, but can influence a preference for certain skin tones, hair types, features, and we all know this. And based on our history and the world we live in no way am I surprised that black men are receptive to the attention they get from other races of women, and I know it has nothing to do with me. That's why I appreciate men like Source Walker, who are honest and not trying to degrade us in an attempt to manipulate black women.
I'm not a person that's only going to be with one woman. I have multiple women in my life. They have to understand that there's multiple women in my life.
He's saying straight up that he prefers white women because they allow him to date other women. And the comments were also alluding to the fact that he's low-key saying it's easier to pimp them out. I mean, he's trash, but we respect honesty instead of spewing the BS about black women's femininity or personality.
Nonsense.
What black women need to understand is that the biggest factors that influence who a man dates oftentimes has little to do with the actual woman. And black women in large don't make themselves accessible to men who value more than proximity to whiteness and actually have access to those women. And so this projects a negative, sometimes desperate, undesirable image because no one praises their counterparts like black women do. But many of you will say, but non-black men, white men who may be able to offset some of the issues with black men also greatly influence this undesirable label. And so we must dissect that also. Disclaimer, here I must compare black women to another group of women, and that can't be white women because we live in a white-centered world. Let's be real, white women can do, look, and behave in any way, and as a whole, they will still be seen as attractive and something to covet. So I'm going to reference Asian women, and this section isn't about Asian women and their appeal or questioning it. The question isn't why are Asian women +1, it's why are black women considered -1. And when you look at some of the things I'm about to discuss, you see that we're actually on opposite ends, and not in the fake manosphere femininity way, but real differences. And so in a white supremacist world, the real question is, what does it mean to be considered an attractive woman of color in this world, and what does that entail? Looking at how desirability is measured, and so data from dating sites has oftentimes been used as a barometer of desirability. And it's regularly been highlighted from a US-based study from OkCupid that Black women were responded to the least on the dating site in comparison to Asian, white, and Hispanic women. And this study they conducted was on 30,000 Americans, and it has been used as a look, Black women, you're clearly not desired by men because you got the least interaction. Remember, dating apps are often a place where men look for hookups. These are not marriage apps, but despite Black women's hypersexual image, or the fact that women of other races, especially white women, engage with Black men sexually at a high rate, there were men who had no interest in seeking Black women on this app, not even for flings. And is it not somewhat strange that men using this app didn't even want to attempt to respond to Black women just to get in our pants? And so I'm just dropping here the concept of sex and sexuality, which I will return to. And so these charts raise many questions, but one thing I want to note is that Asian women came out on top, and this is the Oriental kind since this is US based, and they came out on top over all women. And I just don't want to come across as picking holes in Asian women's desirability because the Asian women I know don't walk around like the hottest thing because of course there is a lot of inferiority to whiteness there. But I need a clear comparison so my conclusions have life. And so diving into Asian women, they are considered very desirable women, meaning that men of all races want to be with them, seek them out, and want to be around them. And I'm not saying Asian women are an ideal type in every community, but we're talking about being known as desirable. And what I'm talking about is pre-K-pop, so we can't just say it's media. This has been a decade-long narrative. Even when Asian women had very little representation, society has accepted that Asian women are desirable and Black women are not. And however, there are a few things about Asian women that don't align with what society tells us is attractive. And so this includes things like excessive plastic surgery, which is the antithesis of beauty. Also, scientifically, curves are considered attractive to men on a primal level because it symbolizes fertility. And even when you look at pinup art, AI generated art created by all races depicting their dream woman, 90% of the time she's extremely voluptuous. And this preference for curvy women has never translated to Black women being sought after by all. And even if most Black women are not receptive to other races, I'll come back to this, even in general chatter about attractive physical features, Black women weren't a part of that discussion. And I'm not saying that men don't love curves in Black women, but it's strange that something that is now embraced on other races and makes people go crazy, there was a point when only one type of woman had that, but it was never embraced then. Also, in our white supremacist culture, we are told that smaller, finer features are more attractive, and this is especially drilled into Black women that certain features make you ugly to men, but the other women, it doesn't seem to be that impactful. I remember even on Daily Mail, there was a story about a Korean figure skater getting divorced, and the comments were like, she's so hot, I can't wait to be next. But the same audience on an article were calling Lori Harvey a man. And I know the Daily Mail is a certain audience, but they were able to look past this figure skater's features that society considers unattractive. But it appears that they can't do the same for some Black women, and there must be a reason for this. And as I wrote in my ebook about how, as a Black woman, if you go to the world and you say, hey, can you tell me if I'm pretty or talented or smart? A lot of the time, the answer isn't going to be the truth because it's based on so much. And so you really need to stop looking outwards. But back to diversity, we also as Black people know that there are groups in our communities who have very small and narrow features that align with the white beauty standard. And I've personally never seen a non-Black guy say, you know what? Black women are not attractive to me, but those Ethiopian women, wow. And that's because they are still Black and it's not about features. And just to say, no matter how questionable I find the study, when something is measured or ranked, there's always someone or something who will be at the bottom. And a smaller pool of suitors doesn't mean it's of poor quality. I mean, just look at the majority of men out here who really wants that. And even with Asian men and their least desired label, I think we can clearly see with the growth of certain media that there are many women of all races who find them attractive, especially East Asian men. But desirability is complex because if I find a Japanese man very attractive and I don't marry one for whatever reason, the narrative persists that these men are undesirable. And so there's a long standing label on Asian women as women who men gravitate to. And this suggests to me that there must be more than just being curvy or pointy nose when it comes to men wanting to seek you out. And I'm sure we can accept that, right? And so, what is this desirability about? We want access to it. Teach us your ways. And unfortunately, we have Black women who are wasting their time watching 100 femininity videos by non-Black women. And so they're asking Anna Bay, a white woman, how did you bag this rich Arab guy? Or asking Asian women, how did you get that nerd to pay for your condo? And it's clear that you guys don't understand certain things. So please subscribe for future videos. But I want to note that this concept of femininity is a cover up for satiating men's insecurities. One of my favorite shows is Million Dollar Listing, and they actually had a cast member on the LA edition whose Asian wife put hands on him. And I know that if that was a Black woman, the narrative would be, you see, this is why Black, blah, blah, blah. But if she's not Black, it's like, let's move on quickly. And as I say, there's a reason why someone is less likely to question which stereotypes are real or false, no matter what they see or experience. A lot of people would read that story and move on, or they see stories about, sexless marriages and low birth rates in some cultures, which isn't attractive to the everyday man based on a lot of the material they are consuming. But that doesn't matter and has nothing to do with why they prefer certain women. And so a lot of men will say, Black women are masculine, but even men who pretend to be women are said to have an inner Black woman. And so look, if there was a Black woman, and let's say she's meeting what society is telling us is attractive, great curves, lighter complexion, small features, soft, submissive, would she have men, all races, running to her? Would she have at least, most men swiping right on this submissive Black beauty? I don't think so. And then many of you will say, bring up racism, and I'll keep referring back to this, but I want Black women to actually understand that there's actually a greater incentive for non-Black men to want to find beauty in Black women because of how some non-Black women behave in regards to Black men. I mean, there's literally white women paying Black men for sex as we speak. It's natural to look at the counterpart of who your women like. But again, even if the door isn't always open, just in general chatter, they should want to find beauty in Black women. But we don't see that. And so something must be blocking it. And so we will move on to the real main blocker and move past the fake narratives. And so here we are with how non-Black men view themselves in comparison to Black men. Now, what I will say sometimes triggers Black women, especially divested Black women, because they are tired of putting Black men on a pedestal. But if we don't acknowledge this, we will find ourselves confused. And I've noticed many surface level statements like, of course, white men aren't triggered by Black men. They own the world. And I think admitting that many non-Black men feel insecure when it comes to Black men doesn't make Black women, especially those who are becoming more open to other races, feel that good, because we've already been indoctrinated with narratives that our genes are superior and Black men are the archetype of masculinity. And I think this in part is why I think many Black women have little interest in other races, because they see this. And so when it comes to any regular non-Black guy, many of them feel some type of inferiority to Black men due to real or imagined stereotypes surrounding Black men's sexual prowess. This was even the root of a lot of racism in the West, and it still is, as there was an obsession with Black men's phallus and the relationship between Black men and white women. And such relations were even responsible for the Tulsa Black Wall Street Massacre, which is considered the single worst incident of racial violence in American history. And for some reason, many don't look at this as a factor influencing the desirability of Black women. I don't think most men feel inferior to other races of men, especially sexually, which is very important to men. And so you can see that who our counterparts are influences our desirability. The type of men on social media and on dating apps are who people go to gauge who is attractive and who is not. And they see the regular guy who lives maybe in a multicultural society with his part-time job, goes to the gym to try and look muscular and attractive. And he might make a video saying he only finds white and Asian women attractive, but Black women unattractive. And no one questions his position in society or how he feels about other races of men. And I feel like certain women make men feel superior than they actually are, and Black women do not do that. And so when discussing this particular factor, I usually focus on white men, but what I discuss applies to all non-Black men. But I focus on white men because I see that in a white supremacist society, it's very clear that as a woman of color, to be considered desirable, you must make yourself accessible to white men. And this is also due to proximity, colorism, multicultural societies. So we can't really discuss interracial dating without white men. And so many Black women have experienced the inferiority of these men firsthand, being asked on dates whether they have been with Black men or their dates discussing Black men's penis, and even in an industry like sex work or being a sugar baby, Black women are being asked, have you slept with a Black man before? And now this is a man willing to give money to a Black woman, willing to date this woman. And so the he's just racist argument doesn't hold weight, but he's still curious as to whether she slept with a Black man before. And what do you think the reason for this is? And many non-Black men ask their women the same thing. And non-Black women talk about how triggered the men in their communities are when they date Black men. But of course, this could be rooted in racism. But back to Asian women who are considered extremely desirable women. I don't think any man on this planet is dating or pursuing an Asian woman and has asked her, have you dated an Asian guy before? And I don't think there's a white man dating an Asian woman who is worried that she has dated Asian men in the past and those men have given her amazing sexual experiences. Of course, they may have, but that doesn't cross his mind. And I think this opportunity that Asian women present to date women where you feel like there is little competition from their natural counterparts who view you as superior is so great that even Nazis who should want to preserve their white genes gravitate to them. So if that's so compelling, I wonder what the opposite does and the impact it would have on the number of men who gravitate to women on the opposite end.
Two things that I just find that I don't like with them. One is you guys are very insecure when a Black guy comes around. I don't think all white men are insecure when a Black guy comes around. I just feel like when I have dated the guys I've dated, every time a Black guy has come around, they just get stiff in the chest, the energy kind of drops.
Now let's compare to Black women being asked if they've dated Black men, seeing their white non-Black dates shrink in the presence of a random Black man. The reality is that there is an insecurity in regular men that his Black girlfriend has had better sexual experiences or that he won't be able to measure up. And this is actually the root of a lot of the obsession around virgins in many cultures. And so most men watch porn, the majority do, and the BBC imagery is rampant in pornography, whereas men like Asian men are almost non-existent in Western pornography. And here is an anonymous white man on Quora answering the question, why are white women Black men couples more common? And I've seen men on forums say that they believe Black women want a hung man and that they believe a Black woman would never truly be satisfied with them sexually. And it should be understood that feeling triggered like this isn't a positive experience for a man. And men don't want to feel insecure in a relationship. And studies have found that the fear of not being masculine is greater than the fear of death in men. And for some reason, this hasn't been explored to explain why some women are more desired than others. I think it's interesting that all races of men on a dating app gravitate to women who apparently have counterparts with the smallest penises, and the smallest number of men gravitate to women who apparently have counterparts with the largest penises. I don't know. And I'm in a debunking mood. And the narrative I often see is that white and other men do not want half black children and would prefer half Asian children who are paler and smarter. Bear in mind, the smartest immigrant group are Nigerians, but again, some narratives are pushed harder than others due in part to what I'm explaining in this blog, but also the media. And so one question I have about this is, why don't white women who are raised in the same environment as white men want smart and pale children? Like, non-black women, specifically white and Hispanic, are well known for fetishizing mixed half-black children, while at the same time having contempt for black and mixed women. Why don't most non-black women want children from so-called respected Asian cultures? There's millions of single Asian men who I'm sure will be down for it, but we understand that here there is a sexual element as to why they seek black men more than other races of men due to the Mandingo stereotype. But with white men and others, the sexual element isn't explored. Black women are extremely hypersexualized, but the difference here is that they believe they can please Asian women sexually more than any other race of woman, even if they can't. And so for men, the sexual element in a relationship is the ability to please, while for women, it is the ability to receive pleasure. In the words of Kanye,
for people to promote that, it's demonic.
It's honestly demonic to me when a group of women feel like fewer men pursue them than other races because they are lacking in this or that, when the real reason some men wouldn't pursue them, regardless of their looks and personality, has nothing to do with them. And I am a natural researcher, and I've watched all sorts in my life. I've been in so many online spaces, real life spaces, but I think this gives my ideas life. And so I've referenced this very fascinating interview with the Italian porn star Mike Stefano before on my website, and it highlights a few things to me. Now, he and the interviewer have a preference for black women.
And you and I are similar when it comes to women. Right?
Oh, yeah.
Because I know you like black women.
That's the trigger right there. I was going to say we have a lot in common.
And it's clear from this man's portfolio of interracial pornography, his relationships with black porn actresses, that he's very much into black women. But he recently had been living in the Philippines. At the time of the interview, he was in the US and had returned to the US industry. But he said he was somewhat based there, and he states that he had been in the Philippines because he was burnt out from the porn industry and needed a place to sleep with younger women. And he was saying that the Philippines is the epicenter of whores, and you can get a different girl every night. And, there's a focus on the girlfriend experience and all sorts of stuff. I mean, this man is clearly a deviant. He's a porn star. But I was intrigued that someone that into black women chose to be around Asian women. And at one point, he's talking about his preferences. And the guy asks him, after black women, like, what's your next type? And he says, Hispanic women. And the other guy's like, yeah, they have black in them. These are full-blown fetishizers. And he clearly states that he likes very, very dark skin and curves. And so you would ask, if you like black women, why would you choose to be around Asian women? And looking at this interview as someone who has a gift of reading people, it became evident that this is a guy who is older now and was very successful in this industry. He's coming closer to the end of his career. And he and the interviewer were like, they would go to porn awards and no one would recognize them, and porn is a young man's game. And so there was a sense of like feeling like a nobody, feeling less than others. In this case, the young porn stars dominating the industry. And so this energy of feeling less than other men and unimportant is common amongst the everyday man. Most men nowadays are extremely insecure and triggered, and we see this by the growth of incels and the manosphere talking points creeping into everyday spaces. But some of you will say, well, he's a porn star. Of course, he's going to be in the Philippines looking for sex, but there are black sex workers, unfortunately, that fit his preference. But he made it clear that the poor women in the Philippines needed him, and he was seeking some type of elevation from these women, which I believe he can't get in the US now that he's older. And to move away from a porn star, because Manila might be the place to be, let's look at this comment from a random white guy. He says, I do typically date Oriental Asians. If I had to choose what I find most physically appealing, it would be Indian or Latina. And so society has pushed this idea that men date on a primal level. They hunt only who they want based on beauty and positive attributes and never settle. But a lot of these men seem to date and be around Asian women and others, which is what desirability is and why these people are ranked high, but seem to have preferences for other women. And so we're told that because everyone looks at outcomes, that if more people gravitate to one type of woman, then she must have something superior, and that's not always the case. The question is, does being sought after actually mean that you are who men find most attractive and appealing? I'm not sure about that, and I think most men don't go around saying, who's the most beautiful, sexy woman I can find? I think men nowadays are thinking, where can I go to feel good about myself? And them choosing to be around or more eager to praise Asian or any other doesn't mean their preferences are ugly. It means that whatever they are seeking at that point in their lives, Asian women are willing to give it to them. And I don't think your average black woman is thinking about white men and Asian women or anything that doesn't have black men involved. But I feel like society's inability to look at things beyond surface creates incorrect narratives about our attributes and beauty as black women. Less men seeking you out compared to other races does not mean you're ugly or less attractive than them. You just cannot or are not willing to provide what that individual needs. And I don't see how black women don't see that we reside in a completely different ecosystem than other races of women. And especially since relationships, women have the final say on whether they occur. A woman having a lot of men around her, this is desirability, doesn't equate to being the most beautiful, having the best attributes. Even when I speak on women making men feel good about themselves, it's not just the stereotypical being doting and soft, because black women know how to love a man. I think a lot of it is just the ecosystem in which they reside, where men feel more comfortable because they don't have to compete with their natural counterparts due to real or imagined stereotypes. And less men wanting to be with us as black women doesn't mean we're intrinsically lacking something. I just feel like I can't tell a man with his 4-inch penis that it's big and he'll believe me because of stereotypes surrounding my counterparts or who women that look like me usually put on a pedestal. And so it's very clear to me that for black women, due to ideas about the real or imagined sexual potency of black men, many other men feel inferior to that and may not feel comfortable seeking you, regardless of your looks and your body or your personality. I recall even seeing Desiree, who's a very pretty girl on Instagram, and men were calling her a fool because she said she wanted a partner who was wealthy, I believe. And in our society, you have to understand that beauty and personality doesn't make you attractive. You have to, especially in this day and age, it's about pacifying insecure men. It's about being easily accessible, either due to your ecosystem, who your counterparts are, or putting certain men on a pedestal who typically cannot get attention elsewhere. And now we cannot even say that most black women are even open to non-black men.
All right, Gianna, what's this line about?
Kind of have a no dating Asian sort of policy. You kind of look a bit like my brother.
Oh, racist. Gianna, did not expect that from you. We have a diversity charter here. Cherie, explain this red light.
I'm sorry, I have a no dating Asian policy as well.
And you see here 2 Asian women reject an Asian man on an Australian dating show, and they're essentially telling millions of viewers in a white majority country that they do not date men in their own race. And it's hard for me to expect men to interact with me the same way they would interact with women who put other men before their own men or have counterparts who have been stripped of their masculinity. And because society loves to compare outputs when the input isn't the same, and that's one of the things I really dislike. Black women, of course, were basically forced to be a part of the interracial dating conversation because of the behavior of black men. But I would say more so white women, because women allow relationships to take place. And so we were not allowed to be like Arab women, for example, where you just stick to your own race and are still seen as attractive. For us, not engaging in it only suggest to society that it's only because we don't have the option to do so. And most black women are not even open to other races like that. Even some black men feel like only a certain type of black man is preferred. And again, the idea that your average man may choose to approach or swipe the woman he assumes will like him is never acknowledged. And so this obviously influences our desirability, but also not being known as desirable also influences black women's openness to other races of men and certain types of black men. And when I hear someone say, I couldn't get, an American girl, but when I'm around Asian women, I have so many options, that's not my perception of what being desirable is. I thought it was about men's ideal type. I thought it was about possessing beauty and traits that are superior. But in this society, like I said, as women become less accessible, being more accessible is going to make you desirable. And being less accessible or open to different types of men will make you undesirable. And another issue I see is that when you give someone an undesirable label, it prevents them from seeking certain types of men. And I believe black women, because of the ecosystem in which we reside, have to seek men who are content in life, confident, successful. The average black woman is internalizing a narrative that she's unattractive. And to be with said men who are confident, content, successful, confidence is required to go in these spaces. And I feel like that confidence is being robbed from black women due to false narratives pushed by the everyday man. And Hispanic, white, and Asian women feel comfortable plotting on men, because of the narratives that exist. And so when an Asian woman is signing up to Jewish dating sites and is willing to convert, because apparently Jewish men make the best husbands, and why should being non-Jewish stop you? I believe, the false narrative surrounding why we are not sought after as others is stripping black women of such boldness that other women have. And of course, not all of us, but many of us. And unfortunately, most black women are not in the spaces of these wealthy, successful, content men. Certain schools, the tech, the finance industry, these are dominated by white and Asian women. And so this is another hurdle, but with knowledge, these hurdles can be overcome. It's not just about going to upscale restaurants. If there's a tech conference in your town, why not research the speakers and get as close as possible? Because if there's women out there Googling the highest earners in a certain field and going to their conferences and events in the hopes they run into each other, they will obviously have a different outcome to women who pray and think they're not good enough. So I remember even seeing a very pretty black girl respond to a question where she stated she's attracted to East Asian and black men. And I thought 9 times out of 10, we know she's going to be with a black man, right? Because they are very forceful in courting and confident that, every black woman desires them. So an Asian man might see her with a black guy and see this as evidence that, or the narrative he's internalized that, black women prefer their own and no one desires Asian men. But he wouldn't know that she actually does find Asian men attractive and may not have made choices based on ideas about what she thinks Asian men desire, or not plotting on them like other races would, as they are good at, plotting on specific men, and therefore having, the confidence to only date the man who approached her. And so you need to be cautious internalizing narratives based on the couples that exist or what you see, because so many factors influence who people end up with beyond attraction. So another factor I want to talk about is black women not being status symbols. And I alluded to this previously. A status symbol is defined as a possession that is taken to indicate a person's wealth or high social or professional status. And for most men, what is considered a status symbol would be white women.
We programmed these victims to feel that if they get a white woman, they will have it. Like a black cat told me who was graduating from graduate school at Harvard, that marrying a white woman was a part of the Harvard degree. In other words, I'm really in.
Partly the reason why colorism is rampant in communities of color, and due to most of us living in a white supremacist society, the richest men are white, people all over the magazines. And so when you compare other groups to black women, you can see that we are very different. We have darker skin, negative stereotypes emboldened by the media, have a counterpart who is said to have the biggest penises, We pedestalize black men, and we have a counterpart who is the most disenfranchised but most fetishized, specifically by white women. And so this all seems quite negative, but the real issue is that us not being status symbols, we are not making the choices that would align with that. And it may surprise you, but the type of men who are willing to date a woman who is not a status symbol are men who already have status. And so it's a double-edged sword, because the average black woman is being told she's unattractive. And so she begins to internalize that. And so in her mind, she doesn't think she can get the CEO like other races of women. Of course, I'm not talking about every black woman, but I think many. And so she's just going to take what she can get. And this is the aim of many men online, without understanding that it's actually those more confident men, those men living in their purpose, who would be more into dating a woman like her because of the issues I've explained prior. And these are not the men you walk outside and they're waiting on your doorstep. Some effort is needed on the woman's behalf to occupy certain spaces the way other women do. And I can see that some of the richest men on the planet feel comfortable enough to marry black women. And it should be understood that these men have access to every race of women on the planet. And this is against the backdrop where there are so many other races who date out way more than black women. And interestingly enough, black women are able to access these types of men, even though black women are less open. And considering the dating site statistics and the opinions of men over Twitter and YouTube, even many black women have married members of European royalty, and which again shows me the caliber of men comfortable dating black women. Personally, I most recently was in a hotel lobby, and my sister works in the luxury space, and there was a digital assets conference, and these men were looking at me like I was Beyonce in 2003. Bear in mind, I was the only black woman there. I am dark-skinned, I am West African, and look, I have taken the time to, take care of my appearance, but these men were with their partners or colleagues from the backgrounds that society says are so desirable, and they're taking their eyes off of them to look at me. There was even one American guy who was like, "Ooh, you're so beautiful." And I just feel that when I'm in spaces with men of a certain caliber, the attention I get is so much greater than when I was, for example, at uni surrounded by regular guys. And if we look at today's men, with how many of them think and behave, is being considered desirable by them worth it? I want some men, of course, maybe even a few, because only a few are truly worth it. So not being desired by the majority should not be an insult, considering how most are. And you need to be aware of that as black women, because you're sometimes chasing that desirable label. But the question is, desired by who? Look at the majority. And so another thing that's very key is that black wealth is concentrated amongst rappers and athletes. And these are very famous men who came from dirt. And so it's no surprise they are seeking a status symbol, which we are not. Kim and Kanye, although now divorced, had the most viewed Instagram photo of their marriage. So this is an image seen all over the world. But in other communities, wealth isn't concentrated amongst athletes. So I feel like when successful non-black men marry black women, like Umit, for example, who is Turkish and his father owns an industrial company worth assets over 84 billion, it doesn't really hit the news. It doesn't go viral. And this adds to the narrative that black women are undesirable. We hear all day about NBA athletes and Latinas all over Miami, but no one's going to talk about the Puerto Rican billionaire with a black wife, who I know is probably one of the few Puerto Rican billionaires, because he's not going to be on Vogue. He's not all over social media. So this is a problem, especially not with just how society views our desirability, but black women themselves not seeing what they are able to obtain. And unfortunately, many people have a vested interest in pushing the "no one wants you" narrative, because non-black men obviously dislike their women with black men, and so sometimes they project that pain onto black women. And we know black men are struggling in different ways, so of course it's in their interest to lower the self-esteem of black women, so you don't think you can get anything better, or even the top shelf of black men. And so a lot of you don't understand that those guys on Twitter and YouTube are actually not on your level. I'm talking about, the quality black woman. And I wish some of you knew the caliber of men who are comfortable dating you. And most of the men who express negativity towards us are literally bottom of the barrel. But they are the loudest on the mic. And so it clouds our judgment sometimes about our ability, our desirability, and what options we have. Now, back to this idea of racism. I don't know why men from million-dollar family dynasties and members of royalty are okay diluting their pool, but the average white firefighter on Love Island can't. Clearly something else is at play. And it's funny that when I wrote this article on my website, I was like, it's literally easier for some of you to get Harry Styles than a builder on Love Island, because Harry isn't thinking about BBC. And this was before he dated the biracial actress Taylor Russell. And so even to my racism girlies, where you think, racism is a big part of your life, and that's clearly having an impact on Black women's dating prospects or how people perceive us. But my question is, even if you're one of those, why would you even ask the world for validation if you know it's built on bias? And I want Black women to understand that you could be a Black Barbie, everything perfect, and there'll be a portion of men who will never feel comfortable dating you or speaking highly of your beauty. And I think this is very freeing when you've internalized this, because you're not thinking about what this person says or what that person's saying. You just know who you are. And so a Black woman will go on Love Island, and then, maybe she gets kicked off first, and then people with their think pieces, sorry, white guys don't like you lot. But then when I see Black women with successful white men, for example, they're more on the average side, because that's probably who they could get, or that's the few Black women in those spaces. And so the dark skin is still there, and the negative stereotypes are still there. Having counterparts with the biggest penises is still there. But very successful men are still willing to marry Black women over other races. And you have to ask yourself why. While they're saying you're the least attractive, why does this $1 million heir have a black wife? Because they have their own status. They're confident, they're content, and they're able to look over certain things in the ecosystem that an average guy is triggered by, to go for what the individual woman actually brings to the table. And so all this is against the backdrop of not being in those spaces and even being less open. And so most men in this world are everyday men, and they have insecurities, and men in general are feeling quite low at the moment. So it's hard for Black women, unless she's top tier, even then, to get a consensus on her being desirable or beautiful the way average women of other races can be. But average Black women can still access the very best men. And so I think it's a big mistake for Black women to question their beauty and femininity because they are less sought after. And I also think these narratives make Black women like super harsh and judgmental on other Black women. Where we see someone not behaving correctly, it's like, this is why we're not blah, blah, blah. And I'm all for better representation and putting your best foot forward, because this would make what I'm saying so much more clear. Because I remember someone was like, damn, back in the day when Black women would always get eliminated in dating shows, she would be like, if Bernice Burgos went on one of these shows, like, would she be booted out? And I think, yeah, I'm all for representation, because if we had Bernice in one of these shows and she wasn't getting a certain level of attention, even the most brainwashed Black woman would have to ask some questions. And so men believe there's less they have to think about and less they have to be when dating other races of women. And as Black women, you have to internalize that this has nothing to do with you. And it can be confusing because we think that if you have a nice appearance and a nice personality, any man should be able to recognize that, but only certain types of men are open to dating us. And if we didn't have the BBC, attached to our counterparts, if we didn't put Black men on a pedestal, if we lived in a society where Blackness was comparable to whiteness, meaning we were a source of status, more everyday men who make up most of society would probably want to date us. But these factors have nothing to do with who we actually are. And I know it can be difficult not to internalize the negatives surrounding Black women and our desirability, because less men seek us out compared to others, but the why is important. And you should know better and see that it's a lot deeper than what is presented on the surface. You're never going to be desired by all men, but again, who would want to be anyway? So work on yourself, position yourself in the right places, seek whoever can enhance your life, and please disengage from these false narratives. You can have the best men.